From the start, I was always going to play through Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin due to my love for Final Fantasy as well as wanting to experience Jack Garland's story and taking all the memes that had arisen even before the game came out. Knowing this was an ongoing project from Team Ninja and their success on Neo 1 and 2, I was excited for this game. My initial beliefs from articles and reviews were that the game would have great combat while trying its best but coming up short to tell a story all within the world of Final Fantasy 1. After completing the game, I felt that my original beliefs were actually the exact opposite. Team Ninja did a great job creating an origin story for Jack in the original Warriors of Light, and how everything came to be for the start of FF1. I'm glad that my expectations for the story were surpassed. I only wish that I could say the same thing when it came to combat for Stranger of Paradise. Let's talk specifics. So first of all, I have to get all the feelings about the combat off my chest. Is the combat good? Overall, yes. Everything works and makes sense. But numerous times does this game just completely shit all over you and cheese the ever-living out of you. My dear lord, this game tilt me at times. The combat is good, again, but at times not all fights are made equal. Some enemies will give you a way harder time than others. Even though at times certain fights did tilt me off the edge of the world, I've tried my best to not let it skew how I felt about the game and more specifically the combat as a whole. But at times during certain fights, it felt like the margin for error was so slim. If I made one small mistake, I was dead, and then you have to restart all over again. And if it's not a boss, you have to re-clear numerous packs of mobs. Let's use a Tiamat fight for example. The first phase is totally normal. Avoid and block attacks and hit Tiamat when certain openings are available to get in damage. Then there's phase 2. Phase 2 requires you to get Tiamat's break gauge down, since once Tiamat gets below a certain health threshold, it uses regenerate to bring her health all the way back up again. This process is so slow and takes forever. I died numerous times with her break gauge around 10 to 15% because I got barely clipped by an attack and instantly staggered and one shot by Tri Disaster. Once you get staggered, you're almost always dead in this game. If your break gauge is broken, you have to watch Jack sit on the ground, hurt, with his thumb up his ass forever before you can move again or try to evade. This boss fight becomes this super boring marathon where you're constantly dodging and blocking until you can make small chips in her break gauge. Tiamat's kit constantly has her dodging back and using abilities that will keep you at a distance, so you have so few openings to inflict damage, and when you do, there's only so many abilities you can use since you have about 2 seconds before she attacks again. It's fights like this that show me some things weren't planned or thought out all the way that well. The final boss was like this as well in a sense. To avoid spoilers, I won't show footage or give details, but during his second phase, my windows to hit him with an axe, since I was Breaker, were so small I couldn't consistently get an R1, R2 ability off without frequently taking damage in return. At most, before switching to Sage, all I could do was get off 2 normal attacks before having to back off. The weird thing was, my best window to hit him in phase 1 was different from phase 2 regardless of the fact he was using the same attack. When I had to go for an R1 R2 combo, I'd get punished in phase 2 when I wouldn't at all in phase 1. Similar to Tiamat, it felt like if you don't play a certain way and or job, you can be punished hard, or you just can't make a single mistake if you're dead set on a specific job. I ended up cheesing him with Sage and constantly kiting him out with Dia spells and having Blood Weapon up for constant sustain for when I got clipped by spells and attacks. This felt a little anticlimactic, but it was the best way to get past his phase 2 since he can easily kill you in 1 or 2 hits depending on your health. The worst fight in the entire game was actually during a side quest, and it was to a group of mobs of all things as well. For this section, I'm going to show my, in quote, highlights of this fight. These clips are all from the side quest which is towards the end of the game. There is an area in the back that has 3 elite horsemen enemies called Nightmares, and then 2 roundworms. Having to deal with them all constantly spamming ranged attacks, charging attacks, or unblockable attacks made this one of the dumbest, most frustrating moments I've experienced in a game for a long time. This also isn't one of those moments where you can just say, well, get good, and just beat it, because you're literally running for your life and you never have a chance to do anything to kill just one of them. Numerous attacks are being spammed at you constantly, so you never have an opening, and for whatever reason, you seem to get focused hard. Every time I had 5 enemies attacking me non-stop with both Neon and Sophia seemingly doing nothing, or at least that's how it felt. It's these fights which make me ultimately just want to get through the game at the end. Trying to kite out 5 mobs that spam abilities isn't fun. It's just a terrible negative system put into a game. The nightmares are also practically immune to getting crowd controlled or stunned. The only way you can do that is by charging an attack that will hit hard enough, but since 5 enemies are constantly attacking you non-stop, that's just impossible. When I finally cleared, what happened ultimately came down to RNG. It was when, for whatever reason, the enemies split up and I could finally fight them at only 1 or 2 at a time. In other words, I got lucky since there's no tools in the game that let you deal with 5 enemies all at once. The best way to summarize all these is that there are a few fights in the game in which you need to get lucky and have good RNG based on the enemies and what the fight entails, or you need to play a certain way versus certain enemies or bosses instead of playing a desired job or playstyle due to how fights work. For whatever reason, Team Ninja decided having enemies either spam you with attacks or wait and do nothing until you attack and then ultimately trigger an unblockable attack is nothing short of just bullshit, since there's nothing you can do and often your teammates do little to help. Another issue is your teammates feel useless a lot of the time as well. If you don't select the command to have them go all out with their abilities, you will frequently find them standing around and watching as you proceed to be the only person fighting. It sucks, and thankfully this is only going to happen so many times and is extremely rare until you get towards the end of the game. But when you do encounter these moments, all you can do is try your best not to tilt or rage. Also, f*** Tomberries. How you fight and your combat style comes down to your current job you have selected. The job system outside of niche situational fight scenarios is actually well done. The way leveling jobs, build paths, and how they play out are all really well executed. The jobs you get to play as throughout Stranger Paradise are all ones that are familiar to the Final Fantasy series. In my opinion, some jobs felt way stronger than others, though with that said, I didn't playtest each one thoroughly or try building some due to just focusing on jobs I liked a bit later on. Each job scales off different stats and has different abilities, so the room for different playstyles is there. My personal favorite endgame jobs were Breaker and Sage. I used Sage more so as a niche second job and ended up playing Breaker most of the time since I had unlocked it. Using Zan Tetsuken on mobs and one-shotting them never got old. Being able to get off charge level 3 hits with this gigantic sword versus bosses was great considering 1, how much damage a single hit could do,
That's a lot of damage!
And 2, for each charge level you would be able to lower your target's physical and magical defense down. So with charge 3, Santetsuken would do an immense amount of damage as well as lowering the enemy's physical and magical defense 3 levels. Not sure exactly how much that is, but it does also increase all incoming damage to that target for a nice chunk of time as well. That with using an axe and the abilities associated with it specifically were by far my favorite. Finding openings and charging abilities to often one-shot health bars and break gauges made me feel like a freight train on a one-way trip to killing Chaos down. Some jobs I really didn't care for, but with how many different jobs, abilities, and stats there were, I felt like you could easily make any job viable or useful in the correct situation. The best part about combat is getting different soul bursts on enemies and just watching all the different ways Jack can absolutely annihilate and destroy them for a killing blow. Honestly, you're doing yourself a disservice by not watching each and every unique soul burst animation for each type of enemy and boss. Team Ninja did a great job in coming up with these and making them all so satisfactory and entertaining no matter how many times you see it happen. I'll even say that Stranger Paradise does such a good job with soul burst kills, they're on the same level as something such as Mortal Kombat fatalities. Leveling different jobs is also well done. Leveling up other jobs without actually playing them is possible if you so desire. You can level your equipped job from experience gained from combat, level other jobs by having armor giving affinities for them and gaining combat experience, or by using anima shards which can be used for experience towards whatever job tree you spend them on. This gives you plenty of options on how you want to play and what you want to focus on. If you want to experiment with different jobs, you can, or if you're infatuated with a certain job, you can play that job while leveling up other jobs if you have the gear that increases that affinity. Itemization and gear management is a little different, however. During your playthrough, be prepared to spend a lot of time going through and managing gear. Going through your gear and making sure you have the best gear for you and your party will be something you will do constantly. At a certain point, you have to make sure you're going through and dismantling weaker gear. Once you achieve 500 pieces of gear in your inventory, you won't be able to pick up anything else. This feels so tedious since if this happens during a mission, you will either have to quit out of that mission in order to dismantle gear for materials, or you will just have to discard gear if you don't want to quit out and restart. 500 pieces of gear might seem like a lot, but with how many drops you get from enemies, chests, and quest rewards, you will quickly reach that number. It would have been nice if excess gear was automatically put into storage for you, or if there was more space for holding items to avoid this issue. Progressing in this game is fairly straightforward. For Jack, the only thing you will ever level up while playing is going to be your job. The way you get stronger is all based on the average item level of your gear. This also applies to your party members. This is totally fine and makes sense, but for some reason Team Ninja decides to gatekeep you later on in the game. Early on, things are normal. Get gear, equip it, do the next mission and side quests, and continue to progress. Around the middle of the game, you start to get missions with elevated item levels recommendations. With me being a completionist, I was doing every side quest regardless, so meeting these requirements wasn't as much of an issue. Late in the game, you get missions and side quests that will be 5+ item levels higher pretty much no matter what. When looking at a quest, you will see your team's average item level compared to the recommended average item level. If you are 5+ levels below that level, you will see a red triangle and exclamation point next to it. What this means is mobs will deplete your break gauge if you get hit or take damage at all, nearly no matter what. Later on in the game, you'll find that just because a gear is higher item level doesn't mean it's better either. This ultimately leaves you two options. Start that mission with an added difficulty to it with your current equipped gear, or go back and repeat content in hopes that you will find gear that is higher than what you have, with hopes that it doesn't completely destroy your build. What's even better about this is your party members can only wear certain pieces of armor. Let's say for example Neon has good gear, but her gloves are super low level and they need to be replaced. Just because you finally get new gloves to drop doesn't mean she can actually wear them. Why? I have no idea. Jack can equip every piece of armor that drops, but your party members can only equip certain pieces. So now you're doing a lot of content at the end of the game, with an added multiplayer on top of it, and hoping you get the gear you need as soon as possible. If you're not like me, where you do every side quest, it's going to be even worse and take even longer to overcome the gear deficit. The OST for Stranger Paradise is well done. Some of the battle themes are pretty epic and get you hyped up for what's going on. The songs match the situations you were in and the themes of the different areas. This was especially the case for boss battles. I did personally enjoy hearing the remix version of the Final Fantasy I theme as well. Overall, it's well done, and many will enjoy its various songs you'll encounter throughout the game. I decided to save the best for last. Stranger of Paradise tells the story of Jack Garland and the events that happened leading up to the start of Final Fantasy I. The story for SOP isn't anything deep or anything crazy, but is still a good and clever take on Jack, what's going on in the land of Cornelia, and the origin of Garland. The cutscenes and voice acting are very good. I was surprised how good they looked, as well as the quality of detail, such as being able to see the pores on characters' faces. It also didn't hurt that Sophia and Sarah are hot as hell. Anyways, as good as the cutscenes were, the non-cinematic cutscenes felt a little odd at times. I don't know if it's just because the cinematics are so good in comparison, but the character motion and voices during all these felt a little robotic at times. I will say that as the game kind of progresses, these did feel a little bit better, but early on just seemed kind of awkward. At first, Jack is just this meme who won't stop going on and talking about killing chaos. The story slowly unfolds and you find out why he has these feelings, who he really is, and where he's from, and ultimately, how it all plays out to who he is at the very end. His story was really well done, and I applaud Team Ninja for the job they did, and how even the Sigma Giga Chad characters such as Jack can have a developing story arc. Even though the spotlight is always on Jack, Ash, Jed, Neon, and Sophia all feel like they have a part to play in telling the main story. I was surprised by some of the events toward the end and how they even made me feel a little emotional. I'm not sure I enjoyed this more than I expected because my expectations were exceeded, or if it was because it was just good. One little side piece I enjoyed that was added were these orbs that you can find in different missions, which add lore and help tell more details about enemies and characters. Some of them are also letters, and it was interesting reading them and trying to figure out whose perspective they were from. Overall, the story was good and it was my favorite aspect of the game. Jack is probably one of my favorite video game characters I've seen in quite a while. So with that, I must pay homage to the man with one of my favorite moments of his during the game.
A foolish dream, no matter how much you wish it, that season will never come. It will remain a dream so long as I live.
don't give a fuck who you are.
The worst thing that happened to Stranger of Paradise was coming out a few weeks after Elden Ring. Like I stated before, I did enjoy this game, and it is good. But what is probably your biggest competition in terms of game and playstyle comes out right before you, and achieving your marks as being as the early game of the year for 2022, you just can't beat something like that. All the times I was getting cheesed during bullshit fights, I said on numerous occasions, I can't wait to be done and get back to playing Elden Ring. It's not like Stranger of Paradise is bad because it's not. It has its problems, and it is a good game. But it's not on the level of something such as Elden Ring, and to be fair, very few games are. Stranger of Paradise has its ups and downs, but if you love action RPGs with tons of loot and gear, or just love Final Fantasy and the universe, then you'll enjoy Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. The game has its difficult parts, and at points will just straight up cheese you, but for those who aren't as hardcore as myself, you can easily counteract this by just lowering the difficulty. I recommend this if you're new to the genre or just want to enjoy the story or other aspects of the game. For my review, I gave Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin an 8 out of 10. Stranger of Paradise tells a great story with great aesthetics. It excels at recapturing the classic jobs from Final Fantasy universe. Though it does fail with certain fights that are more cheesy and unbalanced, as well as asking you to constantly manage your inventory without any resources to assist you. SOP is a good game with a handful of content to get you through the main story, and has a plethora of content even after completing the game. If you're an action RPG fan and not really familiar with Final Fantasy, then I recommend you give this a try. Final Fantasy is known for having some of the best RPGs ever made, and this could be a good way to find out more about the universe and all they have to offer. That is going to be it for my review of Stranger of Paradise. If you like the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It also greatly helps me out. All footage captured for the video was taken from my Twitch stream, which can be found with my social links down below, so give me a follow there as well. I still have more SOP content on the way. I'm working on more job videos coming up next. Hope you all take care and have a good one. Deuces.
Bullshit.